If you have ever seen the film Silent Hill, you have already walked through this town. The fog that never lifts. The ash drifting down out of the sky like snow that isn't snow. The empty streets, the silence, the feeling that the ground itself is wrong, that something underneath is still alive and still burning. The film told you it was fiction. It isn't. The place that inspired it is real. It sits in the green hills of eastern Pennsylvania, and on a clear morning it can look almost ordinary, until you notice the smoke rising out of the ground where there is nothing to burn. It has a name, Centralia, and it has been on fire, underground, for more than 60 years. This is the story of how an entire American town was swallowed by a fire no one could see, no one could stop, and almost no one believed, until the earth opened up and tried to take a child. And it is the story of something stranger still, that Centralia is not alone. That all over the world, the ground is quietly burning, in fires so old and so deep that some of them will still be burning long after everyone alive today is gone. This is history unfolded. Before the fire, Centralia was nothing remarkable, and that was the point. It was a coal town, like 100 others stitched along the Appalachian ridges. Founded in the 1860s, it sat on top of one of the richest seams of anthracite coal in the world. Hard, clean-burning coal that heated the homes and fed the furnaces of a growing nation. By the middle of the 20th century, around 2,000 people lived there. There were churches and schools, a handful of bars, a few groceries, two-story houses with porches that looked out onto quiet streets. Generations of the same families had been born there, worked the mines there, and were buried in the cemeteries on the hill. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and no one expected to leave. Beneath all of it, threading through the rock like the tunnels of an enormous ant colony, lay the old mines. Decades of digging had left a labyrinth of abandoned shafts and worked-out coal seams running directly under the streets and houses. The people of Centralia lived their whole lives on top of it without ever thinking about it. The mines were the past. The town was the present. The two were about to meet. It began with garbage. In May of 1962, the Borough Council faced an ordinary problem. The town dump, an old abandoned strip mine pit on the edge of Centralia, had grown into an ugly, smoldering eyesore, and the Memorial Day holiday was coming. Visitors would arrive to decorate the graves of the dead. The council wanted the place cleaned up, so they did what towns had quietly done for years. They decided to set the trash on fire and let it burn down to ash. On the 27th of May, the dump was lit. Firefighters were there, and that evening they hosed down the visible flames, just as they had in previous years. They went home believing the fire was out. It was not. What no one understood, or what some understood and ignored, was that the floor of that pit was not sealed. There was an opening, a gap in the rock that led directly down into the abandoned mine workings below. And those workings were lined with exposed coal. Fire, given trash and air, will burn out. But fire given a vein of coal the size of a county will do something else entirely. It will follow it. Down and out and onward, through the dark, eating its way along the seam in every direction at once. By the time anyone realized the dump fire had reached the coal, the fire was no longer in the dump. It was in the earth. And it was no longer something you could put out with a hose. For a while, it was almost easy to ignore. You could not see most of it. The fire lived underground, creeping through seams hundreds of feet below the surface, invisible. The signs were subtle at first. A patch of warm ground in winter where the snow refused to settle, a faint smell of sulfur on the wind, a wisp of steam rising from a crack in someone's backyard. In places, if you knelt and looked into a fissure, you could see it. A dull orange glow deep in the dark, the coal itself smoldering, breathing out heat. Officials made attempts to stop it. They dug trenches to cut off the fire's path. They drilled boreholes and flushed the tunnels with water and wet sand. Each time they declared progress. Each time, the fire found a way around, or under, or through. Coal fires are patient in a way that human institutions are not. The fire did not need to win every day. It only needed the people fighting it to give up first. And the cost of truly stopping it kept climbing. Excavating the burning coal entirely, Digging it out before it spread further would have meant tearing open the ground across a huge area at enormous expense, early, before most people even believed there was a serious problem. Every cheaper option was tried first. Every cheaper option failed. And with each failure, the fire grew larger, and the eventual price of stopping it grew with it, until the number became so large that no one wanted to be the one to say it out loud. So the fire kept burning, and the town kept living on top of it, telling itself it would be handled. The first real warnings came not as fire, but as air. Underground, burning coal does not just produce heat, it produces gas. Carbon monoxide, the silent, colorless, odorless killer. And carbon dioxide that can pool in low spaces and push the breathable air away. These gases began seeping up through the ground and into the basements of Centralia. In 1979, the town's mayor, who also ran a gas station, lowered a stick into one of his underground fuel tanks to check the level. When he pulled it out, the fuel on the stick was hot. He brought in a thermometer. The temperature inside the tank, fuel that should have sat cool and stable underground, read over 170 degrees Fahrenheit. That was the moment the abstract became real. The fire was not a distant rumor at the edge of town. It was beneath the streets. It was beneath the homes. It was beneath the children. Families began installing gas detectors in their houses, the kind of devices you would expect on a submarine, not in a small town living room. Alarms would sound in the night. People learned to sleep lightly, to crack windows in winter, to wonder every morning whether the air in their own home was trying to kill them. But it took a boy falling into the earth for the rest of the country to finally pay attention. On Valentine's Day, 1981, a 12-year-old named Todd Domboski was crossing a backyard in Centralia when the ground simply opened beneath him. A sinkhole, 4 feet wide and reportedly more than 100 feet deep, swallowed him in an instant. He fell and caught himself, clinging to a tangle of tree roots jutting from the side of the pit, hanging over a drop into darkness, while hot steam and carbon monoxide poured up around him from the burning mine below. He screamed. His cousin, 14 years old, heard him, ran to the hole, and pulled him out by the hand. Todd survived. Tests later showed the gas rising from that pit carried enough carbon monoxide to have killed him if he had hung there much longer. A 12-year-old boy had nearly been swallowed alive by the ground in his own neighborhood. That image, the earth opening to take a child, did what years of warnings, hot fuel tanks, and seeping gas had failed to do. It put Centralia on the front pages. The nation finally looked. And looking, it had to decide what to do with a town built on top of a fire that could not be put out. What followed split Centralia in two. For some residents, the answer was obvious. The fire was winning. The ground was unsafe, the air was poison, and no realistic effort could save the town. They wanted out. They wanted the government to buy their homes and help them start again somewhere the earth did not breathe smoke. For others, leaving was unthinkable. This was home. It was where their parents were buried and their children had been born. Some of them did not fully believe the fire was as dangerous as the experts claimed. A few suspected the whole crisis was being exaggerated, even invented, as a pretext to drive them off valuable coal land. Trust between the townspeople, the coal companies, and the government had worn thin, and into that gap poured anger, suspicion, and grief. But the science did not care who believed it. Studies traced the fire's spread and found it advancing on multiple fronts, with the very real possibility that it could burn for another century or more. The gases kept rising. The sinkholes kept opening. In 1984, Congress acted. It appropriated more than $42 million to relocate the residents of Centralia, to buy their homes, demolish them, and move the people to safety. Most families took the offer. They had watched the ground betray a child. They were tired of listening for alarms in the dark. One by one, the houses came down. This is the part that is hardest to picture. A town does not vanish all at once. Centralia died slowly, house by house, over years. A family would sell, pack, and leave. The demolition crews would arrive, and where a home had stood for 100 years, there would suddenly be a gap. A bare foundation, a set of front steps leading up to nothing, a driveway pointing at empty air. Then the neighbors on either side would do the same, and the gaps would widen and join until entire blocks were simply gone, reclaimed by grass and brush. The streets remained, laid out in their old grid, named and paved, but they ran now between empty lots where a town used to be. Telephone poles stood along roads that led to nowhere. The grid of a community, with the community erased. Through it all, the fire kept burning beneath the silence, and the smoke kept rising from the cracks. A handful of people refused to go. A small group of residents fought the relocation in every way they could, insisting on their right to stay in their own homes, on their own land, fire or no fire. In 1992, the state invoked eminent domain, claiming legal ownership of all the properties in Centralia, declaring the homes condemned. Still, a few held on. In 2002, the United States Postal Service revoked the town's zip code. Centralia, on paper, ceased to be a place that mail could be sent to. It was, administratively, erased from the map. And yet a few people remained, in a deal that let the last holdouts live out their lives in their homes, after which the properties would pass to the state. They stayed in a town that officially no longer existed, surrounded by empty streets and rising smoke, keeping the lights on in a handful of houses scattered across the ghost of a community. It was this, the fog, the ash, the empty grid of a burning town, that helped inspire the desolate, smoldering world of the Silent Hill film. The filmmakers took the real nightmare of a town eating itself from below and turned it into fiction. But the fiction was always just a step behind the truth. People began to come to Centralia not in spite of what had happened, but because of it, to stand in the real version of the nightmare. For years, a stretch of abandoned highway nearby, its traffic rerouted around the danger, became known as the Graffiti Highway, its cracked surface buried under layer upon layer of spray paint left by the curious. They came to feel the warm ground, to smell the faint sulfur, to crouch by a fissure and watch the smoke pour up out of the earth, and to understand that the ghost town of the horror story was, all along, a place you could actually drive to. And beneath their feet, the fire goes on. Experts estimate there is enough coal still burning under Centralia to feed the fire for another 250 years. Long after everyone alive today is gone, the ground there will still be warm. The smoke will still rise. But here is the part that should keep you up at night. Centralia is not rare. All over the world, the ground is burning. Thousands of underground coal fires, smoldering unseen beneath fields and forests and towns, most of them impossible to put out. And some of them make Centralia's 60 years look young. In a narrow gorge in western Germany, there is a place called the Brennender Berg, the Burning Mountain. Its coal seam caught fire around the year 1668. It has been smoldering ever since, for over 350 years. When the great poet Goethe traveled there in 1770, he stood over the warm, smoking cracks and wrote about the heat rising from the stone. The fire he described is still burning today. In eastern India, beneath the Jharia coal field, a fire that began in 1916 has been spreading for more than a century. But Jharia is not an empty ghost town. Hundreds of thousands of people still live directly on top of the burning ground. Flames and toxic smoke vent from cracks in the streets. The earth subsides without warning, swallowing homes whole. Families cook and sleep and raise children on land that glows at night and breathes poison by day, because they have nowhere else to go. It is Centralia's nightmare, lived by a city of people who never got the chance to leave. And in the hills of New South Wales in Australia, there is a place the local Wonnarua people have always known. They called it Wingen, and Wingen, in their language, means fire. For generations, smoke rose from the top of the mountain, and the site was considered sacred. Europeans who arrived assumed it was a volcano. It is not. It is a coal seam, burning roughly 30 meters underground, creeping south through the rock at about a meter a year. Scientists estimate it has been on fire for at least 6,000 years. It may be the oldest fire on Earth, older than the pyramids, older than writing, a flame that has been moving slowly through the ground since before recorded history began. 6,000 years, one fire, still burning. And not all of these fires were accidents of nature. Some we lit ourselves. In the Karakum Desert of Turkmenistan, there is a crater the size of a city block, filled from edge to edge with flame. In 1971, Soviet geologists drilling for gas collapsed the ground into a hidden cavern of methane. Afraid the poisonous gas would spread, they set it alight, certain, just like the men in Centralia 9 years earlier, that it would simply burn itself out in a matter of weeks. The local people came to call it the door to hell. More than 50 years later, it is still burning. Hundreds of flames rising day and night out of the desert floor, fed by gas that has never run out. They lit it to make a problem disappear. It never did. It is the same story, again and again, in coal seam and gas field and quiet backyard. A fire we thought we understood, a fire we thought we could control, and then the slow, patient discovery that we could not. It did not begin in any of these places with a monster or a disaster or a war. In Centralia, it began with a town trying to tidy up before a holiday, with a small, ordinary fire that everyone assumed would burn itself out. And because stopping it early was expensive, and ignoring it was easy, and admitting the scale of it was unthinkable, the fire was allowed to slip out of reach. By the time anyone took it seriously, it had already won. Centralia is not haunted by ghosts. It is haunted by a decision. 1,000 small decisions to wait, to save money, to hope the problem would solve itself. The town did not burn down in a single terrible night. It was lost the way most things are lost. Slowly, quietly, one ignored warning at a time, until the ground opened and there was nothing left to save. And somewhere under your feet, on some hillside or coal field or quiet field, the earth is still burning, patient, invisible, and in no hurry at all. The fires we start are not always the ones we get to put out. This was history unfolded. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, and we'll keep telling the ones the world chose to forget.